Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Okay, our main story today, the Prime Minister will warn that the EU risks endangering public safety by following what she calls deep-seated ideology in the Brexit negotiations.
In a speech at the Munich Security Conference in a few minutes' time, she's expected to propose a new treaty between the UK and EU to work together on intelligence sharing after Brexit, but warned that there needs to be political will on both sides. Ahead of the Prime Minister's speech, our defence correspondent Alistair Bunkle reports from Munich.
Theresa May will come to the Bayerreicherhof Hotel in Munich this morning to tell the audience of global politicians and securocrats that Britain is still a strong partner but needs a new security partnership with the EU post-Brexit. I recognise there is no existing security agreement between the EU and a third country that captures the full depth and breadth of our existing relationship, she will say. But there is precedent for comprehensive strategic relationships between the EU and third countries in other fields, such as trade. And there is no legal or operational reason why such an agreement could not be reached in the area of internal security.
It's easy to forget because so much has happened, but it's less than 12 months since Theresa May, in her Article 50 letter, said that if there was no Brexit deal, then the security of Europe would be threatened. Today, she comes here to Munich saying almost the opposite, saying that Britain will play a leading role in Europe's security. The challenge for her is to make the audience believe her.
Her audience in this European city will be from all four corners of the world. They will be respectful, but they will want to hear some clarity. The talk in the bars around here is of a Britain retreating from the world stage. Yesterday, the chief of MI6 met his French and German counterparts on the fringes of the conference. They jointly called for an agreement between the EU and UK on areas such as sharing of data.
The UK needs to be addressing the specific problems in relation to data sharing, which will require either us accepting ECJ jurisdiction in that area or something else. We simply haven't begun to address that so far.
Security is one area in which Britain feels justifiably strong. Theresa May should feel on safe ground in Munich. And with so much else about Brexit still up in the air, her speech today needs to count. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, Munich.
So this is the scene in Munich where we're waiting for the Prime Minister to arrive. We were expecting her a couple of minutes ago. Maybe he's checking his watch too. She's late. We'll bring you coverage of her speech as soon as she arrives there.
Let's offer the Minister a round of applause.
Time to have a look at the papers while we wait for the Prime Minister with the journalist Badisha and the Deputy Editor of The Express, Michael Booker. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Hello.
What are we starting with this morning? The Express.
Well, if you're going to be climbing a tree in the next few days, if you're going to be in Wandsworth, you've got to be very, very careful because this Killjoy council bosses are out and about. What they're trying to do, they're trying to change the laws, the bylaws there, and there's been a lot of worry about it. But what they want to do is 49 new diktats. We always like a diktat from the council. That's what they do. They bring in diktats to these councils. And it means that anyone who climbs up trees without reasonable excuse could get a fine of up to £500.
What for?
Well, because they haven't got a reasonable excuse to climb a tree.
But what are the reasonable excuses?
Well, exactly. Now, this is saying that this is going to stop kids from having any fun whatsoever in their lives. I mean, you know, I was never one for climbing trees myself.
No,
I was never very good at it.
terrifying,
You know,
I'm
I was more. You know, I thought I'd get a spelk. I didn't want that.
Michael, on that bombshell, we need to leave it there, I'm afraid, and just head back to Munich, where we can hear from the Prime Minister.
For more than half a century, this conference has brought nations together from Europe and across the Atlantic to forge our common security. The fundamental values we share, respect for human dignity, human rights, freedom, democracy and equality, have created common cause to act together in our shared interest. The rules-based system we helped to develop has enabled global cooperation to protect those shared values. Today, as globalization brings nations closer together than ever before, we face a host of new and growing threats that seek to undermine those rules and values. As internal and external security become more and more entwined, with hostile networks no longer only rooted in state-based aggression and weapons designed not just to be deployed on the battlefield, but through cyberspace, so our ability to keep our people safe depends ever more on working together. That is reflected here today in the world's largest gathering of its kind, with representatives of more than 70 countries. For our part, the United Kingdom has always understood that our security and prosperity is bound to global security and prosperity. We are a global nation, enriching global prosperity through centuries of trade, through the talents of our people, and by exchanging learning and culture with partners across the world. And we invest in global security, knowing this is how we best protect our people at home and abroad. That is why we are the second largest defence spender in NATO, and the only EU member to spend 2% of our GDP on defence, as well as 0.7% of our gross national income on international development. And it is why we will continue to meet these commitments. It's why we've created a highly developed set of security and defence relationships with the US and Five Eyes partners, with the Gulf, and increasingly with Asian partners too. We've invested in critical capabilities, including our nuclear deterrent, our 2 new aircraft carriers, our world-class special forces and intelligence agencies. We're a leading contributor to international missions, from fighting Daesh in Iraq and Syria to peacekeeping in South Sudan and Cyprus, and NATO missions in Eastern Europe. And within Europe, we are working ever more closely with our European partners, bringing the influence and impact that comes from our full range of global relationships. And we want to continue this cooperation as we leave the European Union. The British people took a legitimate democratic decision to bring decision-making and accountability closer to home. But it has always been the case that our security at home is best advanced through global cooperation, working with institutions that support that, including the EU. Changing the structures by which we work together should not mean we lose sight of our common aim, the protection of our people and the advance of our common interests across the world. So as we leave the EU and forge a new path for ourselves in the world, the UK is just as committed to Europe's security in the future as we have been in the past. Europe's security is our security. And that is why I've said, and I say again today, that the United Kingdom is unconditionally committed to maintaining it. The challenge for all of us today is finding the way to work together through a deep and special partnership between the UK and the EU, to retain the cooperation that we have built and go further in meeting the evolving threats we face together. This cannot be a time when any of us allow competition between partners, rigid institutional restrictions, or deep-seated ideology to inhibit our cooperation and jeopardise the security of our citizens. We must do whatever is most practical and pragmatic in ensuring our collective security. And today I want to set out how I believe we can achieve this, taking this opportunity to establish a new security partnership that can keep our people safe now and in the years ahead. So let me start with how we ensure security within Europe. The threats we face do not recognise the borders of individual nations or discriminate between them. We all in this room have shared the pain and heartbreak of terrorist atrocities at home. It's almost a year since the despicable attack on Westminster, followed by further attacks in Manchester and London. These people don't care if they kill and maim Parisians, Berliners, Londoners or Mancunians, because it's the common values that we all share which they seek to attack and defeat. But I say we will not let them. When these atrocities occur, People look to us as leaders to provide the response. We must all ensure that nothing prevents us from fulfilling our first duty as leaders to protect our citizens. And we must find the practical ways to ensure the cooperation to do so. We have done so before. When Justice and Home Affairs ceased to be intergovernmental and became a shared EU competence, of course there were some in the UK who would have had us adopt the EU's approach wholesale, just as there were some who would have had us reject it outright. As Home Secretary, I was determined to find a practical and pragmatic way in which the UK and EU could continue to cooperate on our common security. And that's why I reviewed each provision in turn and successfully made the case for the UK to opt back into those that were clearly in our national interest. Through the relationship we've developed, the UK has been at the forefront of shaping the practical and legal arrangements that underpin our internal security cooperation. And our contribution to those arrangements is vital in protecting European citizens in cities right across our continent. First, our practical cooperation, including our expedited extradition and mutual legal assistance relationship, means wanted or convicted serious criminals and the evidence to support their convictions moves seamlessly between the UK and EU member states. So when a serious terrorist like Zakaria Chadali was found living in the UK, a young man who was believed to have been radicalised in Syria and was wanted for terrorism offences in France, there was no delay in ensuring he was extradited back to France and brought to justice. He is one of 10,000 people the UK has extradited through the European arrest warrant. In fact, for every person arrested on a European arrest warrant issued by the UK arrests 8 on European arrest warrants issued by other member states. The European arrest warrant has also played a crucial role in supporting police cooperation between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, which has been a fundamental part of the political settlement there. Second, cooperation between our law enforcement agencies means the UK is one of the biggest contributors of data, information and expertise to Europol. Take, for example, Operation Triage, where police in the UK worked extensively with Europol and the Czech Republic to crack a trafficking gang involved in labour exploitation. Third, through the Schengen Information System too, the UK is contributing to the sharing of real-time data on wanted criminals, missing persons and suspected terrorists. About 1/5 of all alerts are circulated by the UK, with over 13,000 hits on people and objects of interest to law enforcement across Europe in the last year alone. The UK has also driven a pan-EU approach to processing passenger data, enabling the identification and tracking of criminals, victims of trafficking and those individuals vulnerable to radicalisation. In all these areas, people across Europe are safer because of this cooperation and the unique arrangements we've developed between the UK and EU institutions in recent years. So it is in all our interests to find ways to protect the capabilities which underpin this cooperation when the UK becomes a European country outside the EU, but in a new partnership with it. To make this happen will require real political will on both sides. I recognise there is no existing security agreement between the EU and a third country that captures the full depth and breadth of our existing relationship. But there is precedent for comprehensive strategic relationships between the EU and third countries in other fields, such as trade. And there is no legal or operational reason why such an agreement could not be reached in the area of internal security. However, if the priority in the negotiations becomes avoiding any kind of new cooperation with a country outside the EU, then this political doctrine and ideology will have damaging real-world consequences for the security of all our people in the UK and the EU. Let's be clear about what would happen if the means of this cooperation were abolished. Extradition under the European arrest warrant would cease. Extradition outside the European arrest warrant can cost 4 times as much and take 3 times as long. It would mean an end to the significant exchange of data and engagement through Europol. and it would mean the UK would no longer be able to secure evidence from European partners quickly through the European Investigation Order, with strict deadlines for gathering evidence requested, instead relying on slower, more cumbersome systems. This would damage us both and would put all our citizens at greater risk. As leaders, we cannot let that happen. So we need together to demonstrate some real creativity and ambition to enable us to meet the challenges of the future as well as today. That's why I have proposed a new treaty to underpin our future internal security relationship. The treaty must preserve our operational capabilities, but it must also fulfil 3 further requirements. It must be respectful of the sovereignty of both the UK and the EU's legal orders. So, for example, when participating in EU agencies, the UK will respect the remit of the European Court of Justice. And a principled but pragmatic solution to close legal cooperation will be needed to respect our unique status as a third country with our own sovereign legal order. As I've said before, we'll need to agree a strong and appropriate form of independent dispute resolution across all the areas of our future partnership in which both sides can have the necessary confidence. We must also recognise the importance of comprehensive and robust data protection arrangements. The UK's data protection bill will ensure we are aligned with the EU framework, but we want to go further and seek a bespoke arrangement to reflect the UK's exceptionally high standards of data protection. And we envisage an ongoing role for the UK's Information Commissioner's Office, which would be beneficial in providing stability and confidence for EU and UK individuals and businesses alike. And we're ready to start working through this with colleagues in the European Commission now. Finally, just as we've been able to develop the agreement on passenger name records in the face of terrorist atrocities in recent years, so the treaty must have an ability to ensure that as the threats we face change and adapt, as they surely will, our relationship has the capacity to move with them. Nothing must get in the way of our helping each other in every hour of every day to keep our people safe. And if we can put this at the heart of our mission, we can and will find the means. And we cannot delay discussions on this. EU member states have been clear how critical it is that we maintain existing operational capabilities. We must now move with urgency to put in place the treaty that will protect all European citizens wherever they are in Europe. But clearly, our security interests don't stop at the edge of our continent. Not only do the threats to our internal security emanate from beyond our borders, as we look at the world today, we're also facing profound challenges to the global order, to peace, prosperity, to the rules-based system that underpins our very way of life. And in the face of these challenges, I believe it's our defining responsibility to come together and reinvigorate the transatlantic partnership and the full breadth of all our global alliances, so that we can protect our shared security and project our shared values. The United Kingdom is not only unwavering in its commitment to this partnership, we see reinvigorating it as a fundamental part of our global role as we leave the European Union. As a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, as a leading contributor to NATO, and as America's closest partner, we have never defined our global outlook primarily through our membership of the European Union or by a collective European foreign policy. So upon leaving the EU, it is right that the UK will pursue an independent foreign policy. But around the world, the interests that we will seek to project and defend will continue to be rooted in our shared values. That's true whether fighting the ideologies of Daesh, developing a new global approach to migration, ensuring the Iranian nuclear deal is properly policed, or standing up to Russia's hostile actions, whether in Ukraine, the Western Balkans, or in cyberspace. And in all these cases, our success depends on a breadth of partnership that extends far beyond the institutional mechanisms for cooperation with the EU. That means doing more to develop bilateral cooperation between European nations, as I was pleased to do with President Macron at last month's UK-France summit. It means building the ad hoc groupings which allow us to counter terrorism and hostile state threats, as we do through the 30-strong Intergovernmental European Counter-Terrorism Group, the largest of its kind in the world. It means ensuring that a reformed NATO alliance remains the cornerstone of our shared security. And critically, it means both Europe and the United States reaffirming our resolve to the collective security of this continent and to advancing the democratic values on which our interests are founded. Taken together, it's only by strengthening and deepening this full range of partnerships within Europe and beyond that we will be able to respond together to the evolving threats we face. So what does this mean for the future security partnership between the UK and the EU? We need a partnership that respects both the decision-making autonomy of the European Union and the sovereignty of the United Kingdom. And this is fully achievable. The EU's common foreign policy is distinct within the EU treaties, and our foreign policies will keep evolving. So there's no reason why we should not agree distinct arrangements for our foreign and defence policy cooperation in the time-limited implementation period, as the Commission has proposed. This would mean that key aspects of our future partnership in this area would already be effective from 2019. We shouldn't wait where we don't need to. In turn, if the EU and its remaining member states believe that the best means to increase the contribution Europe makes to our collective security is through deeper integration, then the UK will look to work with you and help you to do so in a way which strengthens NATO and our wider alliances too, as EU leaders have repeatedly made clear. The partnership that we need to create is therefore one which offers the UK and the EU the means and choice to combine our efforts to the greatest effect where this is in our shared interest. To put this into practice so that we meet the threats we all face today and build the capabilities we all need for tomorrow, there are three areas on which we should focus. First, at a diplomatic level, we should have the means to consult each other regularly on the global challenges we face and coordinate how we use the levers we hold where our interests align. In particular, we will continue to want to work closely together on sanctions. We will look to carry over all EU sanctions at the time of our departure, and we will all be stronger if the UK and EU have the means to cooperate on sanctions now and potentially to develop them together in the future. Second, it's clearly in our shared interests to be able to continue to coordinate and deliver operationally on the ground. Of course, we'll continue to work with and alongside each other, but where we can both be most effective by the UK deploying its significant capabilities and resources with and indeed through EU mechanisms, we should both be open to that. On defence, if the UK and EU's interests can best be furthered by the UK continuing to contribute to an EU operation or mission as we do now, then we should both be open to that. And similarly, while the UK will decide how we spend the entirety of our foreign aid in the future, if a UK contribution to EU development programmes and instruments can best deliver our mutual interests, we should both be open to that. But if we are to choose to work together in these ways, the UK must be able to play an appropriate role in shaping our collective actions in these areas. Third, it will also be in our interest to continue working together on developing the capabilities in defence, cyber and space to meet future threats. The UK spends around 40% of Europe's total on defence R&D. This investment provides a sizable stimulus to improve Europe's competitiveness and capability, and this is to the benefit of us all. So an open and inclusive approach to European capability development that fully enables the British defence industry to participate is in our strategic security interests, helping keep European citizens safe and Europe's defence industries strong. And Eurofighter Typhoon is a great example of this, a partnership between the UK, Germany, Italy and Spain, which has supported over 10,000 highly skilled jobs across Europe. That's also why the UK wants to agree a future relationship with the European Defence Fund and the European Defence Agency, so that jointly we can research and develop the best future capability that Europe can muster. Last year's NotPetya cyber attack showed why we also need to work closely to defend our interests in cyberspace. This reckless attack, which the UK and partners have attributed to Russia, disrupted organisations across Europe, costing hundreds of millions of pounds. To contend with a truly global threat such as this, we need a truly global response, with not only the UK and EU, but industry, government, like-minded states and NATO all working together to strengthen our cyber security capabilities. And as our lives move increasingly online, so we will become increasingly reliant on space technologies. Space is a domain like any other, where hostile actors will seek to threaten us. So we very much welcome the EU's efforts to develop Europe's capabilities in this field. We need to keep open all the options which will enable the UK and the EU to collaborate in the most effective way possible. The UK hosts, and we have played a leading role, for example, in the development of the Galileo programme. We're keen for this to continue as part of our new partnership, but as is the case more widely, we need to get the right agreements concluded, which will allow the UK and its businesses to take part on a fair and open basis. It was the tragic massacre at the 1972 Olympics here in Munich, which subsequently inspired a British Foreign Secretary, Jim Callaghan, to propose an intergovernmental group aimed at coordinating European counter-terrorism and policing. At the time, this was outside the formal mechanisms of the European community, but in time, it became the foundations for the cooperation that we have on justice and home affairs today. Now, as then, we can and must think pragmatically and practically to create the arrangements that put the safety of our citizens first. For ours is a dynamic relationship, not a set of transactions. A relationship built on an unshakable commitment to our shared values. A relationship in which we must all invest if we are to be responsive and adaptive to threats which will emerge perhaps more rapidly than any of us can imagine. A relationship in which we must all play our full part in keeping our continent safe and free and reinvigorate the transatlantic alliance and rules-based system on which our shared security depends. Those who threaten our security would like nothing more than to see us fractured. They would like nothing more than to see us put debates about mechanisms and means ahead of doing what is most practical and effective in keeping our people safe. So let the message ring out loud and clear today. We will not let that happen. We will together protect and project our values in the world, and we will keep our people safe now and in the years to come. Thank you.
So the Prime Minister addressing the crowd there and making some very salient points. Let's see if we can talk to our defence correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who's in Munich for us this morning. I mean, clearly the focus very much on maintaining the cooperation that we currently enjoy with Europe.
Yeah, she's basically, and you heard her saying security should not be about transactions. I think really the crux of what she's saying is that when Britain leaves the EU, as we know, it will forfeit its right to certain privileges that you get from being a member of the EU across the board. And she is saying when it comes to security, there is a threat, there is a risk that Britain will lose access to valuable intelligence data, the swapping of information about suspects or potential terrorists across the continent, etc. And she's saying that shouldn't happen. It's too important. The security of Europe and the security of the United Kingdom is too important for Britain to lose out because it will affect everybody. Britain's contribution in security terms to Europe is great, and what it receives from Europe is great as well. And when it comes to security, the two should work together closely. And her proposition is a treaty of which the like does not currently exist. She equates it to a trade deal, for example, and she says that Britain is now ready to start negotiating that.
OK, Alistair, just bear with us. We're going to go back to the Prime Minister. She's answering questions. I think she's just been asked whether it would just be simpler if the UK stayed in the EU.
Option for the UK, question mark. And if, with your permission, I'll add the second question right away. This comes from someone you also know well. It's Charles Grant. Charles, where are you? Somewhere in the back. Charles Grant. Concerning the future UK-EU relationship, the UK will have closer and more productive ties to the extent that it softens its quote-unquote red lines. This applies to the security relationship as much as to trade. Question: are you willing to compromise on the European Court of Justice and on EU rules on data? Question mark.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, if I may respond to your remark, which I recognise received quite a round of applause from the audience, but we are leaving the European Union. There is no question of a second referendum or going back on that vote, and I think that's important because we gave the decision to the British people, and I believe the people have a right to believe that their politicians will actually respect their decisions when we've asked them to make that decision and to deliver on that. As regards the future relationships, be it trade in terms of EFTA and the internal market, or the security relationships that we have and where we see ourselves in relation to the European Court of Justice. The European Union's been very clear about the 4 pillars and the 4 freedoms being indivisible. Part of the reason for the vote in the United Kingdom to leave the EU was about the feeling that we wanted to take control of our own borders, i.e. that was the concern about free movement, that we wanted to take control of our own laws, that was a concern about the role of the European Court of Justice and of decisions that were being taken in Brussels. So, as I said in my speech, where we are looking to participate in EU agencies, we will respect the role of the European Court of Justice, but as a country outside the European Union, we will have our own sovereign legal order. And so the European Court of Justice will no longer have jurisdiction in the United Kingdom. And when we look to develop a new economic partnership in relation to trade, we recognise that there will be discussions. Reference was made to red lines. I've set out principles for our involvement in these matters, and as today I have set out in more detail on the security front, how we see us developing this partnership in the future. I believe what we should both be aiming at is a partnership on trade and security that is in the interests of both sides, both the European Union and the UK, because I believe that new partnership is in both our interests for the future. And that's what we'll be starting to negotiate.
There is a question from Joe Joffe. Can somebody give a microphone to Dr. Joffe from Die Zeit?
A very short one. Mrs. Prime Minister, yes, we should respect Vox Populi, but go back into the early 2000s. The French and the Dutch voted against the so-called Constitution, and then they voted again and accepted the new framework. That's not a matter of national shame. I think it may be a matter of national prudence.
Can we take one more? Would you be kind enough to identify yourself? Yeah.
Julian Lewis, MP, Chairman of the House of Commons Defence Committee. Prime Minister, some people feel that the Brexit vote means that Britain is reducing its commitment to European defence. Can you confirm that this is not the case, as evidenced by the fact that some of the strongest voices in favour of increasing Britain's defence budget are from members of Parliament who are strong Eurosceptics?
Thank you very much. Well, if I can take the first question first. At the time when other countries in the European Union had referenda, the results came out against the new constitution, and then people were asked to vote again. Many of us in the United Kingdom actually said that that was not the right approach that should be taken. And the people in the UK feel very strongly that if they take a decision, that governments shouldn't turn around to them and say, no, you've got that wrong, have another go. See if you can get it right next time. We took a decision across Parliament, an overwhelming majority in the United Kingdom Parliament voted to say that the decision about membership of the European Union should be one for the people of the United Kingdom. And I think it's right in terms of the integrity of the relationship between us as politicians in the UK and the people of the UK that we abide by that decision and that we deliver on that decision. And in response to Julian's question, yes, you're absolutely right. There is no question of us rowing back on our commitment to European defence and security. We are unconditionally committed to maintaining European security. And that is why we want to ensure that the capabilities that we have, that the cooperation, the relationships that we've already developed can continue to be put to the good use of the collective security of us all within Europe. And as you say, Julian, we've made a commitment on our defence spending in NATO. We encourage others to do the same.
I think we have time for one last question from Stefan Cornelius, way back there, editor of Süddeutsche Zeitung.
Prime Minister, your layout of the future security arrangement with Europe and for domestic security in particular now poses the question, or opens the question, is there a link with that treaty you want to negotiate and all the arrangements which need to be done on the economic field? So will there be a security arrangement without the economic arrangement you envision?
Well, we're going into negotiations, so we will, through those negotiations, be looking both at our economic partnership and at our security partnership for the future. What I've set out today is why I believe that security partnership is in everybody's interests, and that we could be looking to be ambitious about this and to have a new security treaty, so that we're not just looking at an arrangement that perhaps more naturally the EU would look at for a third country, but recognise the entwined nature of the work that we do together already, be it on counter-terrorism or on law enforcement and criminal justice work, and develop that security partnership. I hope we can start soon to, as I said, to discuss this security issue. I think it's very important, and I look forward to for us to being able to sit down and go through these details. Within the EU, we already have a different security relationship because of our Justice and Home Affairs opt-out, so we have that different relationship already, but let's be ambitious about a security treaty for the future, and let's ensure that the one goal we all have when we're looking at it is not about institutional structures or mechanisms, but is actually about the security of our people.
OK, let's return to Alistair Buncall. I mean, she's certainly been fairly robust, Alistair, in what she's had to say. I mean, is there an element of that being the fact she's got an audience at home as much as she's got an audience in the room?
Oh, yeah, no, she is definitely speaking to an audience at home, both the wider UK public, but also her own party as well, particularly the Brexiteers within the party. So she is addressing a global audience here, and her message is also for Brussels, but she is very much couching what she says with a view to the headlines back home and how it will be received back in the United Kingdom. Let me bring in a Conservative MP, Johnny Mercer, a member of the Defence Select Committee, who's here at the conference. What did you make of the Prime Minister's speech?
Yeah, I thought it was good. I mean, it's tough to come here, I think. There is clearly an atmosphere of people who don't think Brexit's a particularly good idea, but, you know, she's absolutely right. This is what the British people have voted for, and she's absolutely right to stand up there and be resilient and robust in her defence of that decision. And now we need to move on to this treaty that she's talking about. And I think, you know, she's absolutely right. I think some may not like it so much in terms of talking hardball around security, but I'm afraid that is in the interests of the British people, and she's absolutely right to do so.
And this idea of a treaty, meaning that we continue to share data in particular between EU countries and the UK, because I mean the UK is a big contributor of security to Europe.
Look, I mean, the figures around how much we contribute to security in Europe are pretty eye-watering, and it's clearly in the European Union's best interest to have a very close treaty with us. But look, it's in everybody's interest to make sure this stuff works, and some of our closest allies in world security are outside the European Union, as everybody knows. So let's get together, let's make this work, let's stop sort of getting upset about what's happened with this vote, like they are very much in you know, around the bars, as you well know here, and let's deliver on this and make sure it's you know, it's a success for Britain.
Just correct you there when you say I know well what's going on in the bars. It makes it sound like I've spent too much time in the bars. But tell me, what is the chatter? Because what I've been hearing is people worrying about Britain retreating from the global stage, and that comes from an international audience, not just a European.
No, it does, and I do think, look, there's an element of this that we need to counter with the narrative that we are refocusing on defence, that we are going to increase our defence spending, that we are going to spend what is required to keep the UK safe as a global Britain that is looking to dominate on the world stage and be bold going forward and forge trade links. That needs to be matched with our defensive budget and our attitude towards defence, and that is what people are looking for. I think if we do that, that will, satisfy a lot of the fears around us leaving the European Union, and it's an opportunity to redefine the nation's relationship with its military, which is something clearly that's very important to a lot of us within the Conservative Party.
Just finding the EU, will they be receptive to some sort of treaty?
Well, I think they will be, because it's in their best interest. I think clearly we're going to go through a period where people are going to be upset that the UK public have decided to make this decision. But we, as the Prime Minister has rightly said, we are leaving the European Union, and I think pragmatism will actually take over, and we will get to a place where this works for everybody. We get a good deal leaving the European Union, and then we get on with it in the UK and work hard to face some of the domestic challenges we all know we face at the moment.
OK, Johnny Mercer, thank you very much for your immediate reaction to the Prime Minister's speech. Jean-Claude Juncker, the EU Commission President, up on stage next. It'll be interesting to see whether he reacts directly to what the Prime Minister had to say this morning, and I'm sure more broadly he will have something to say about Brexit.
OK, Alistair, thank you. Prime Minister's speech, she's warned that the EU risks endangering public safety by following what she calls deep-seated ideology in Brexit negotiations. In a speech at the Munich Security Conference, she's proposed a new treaty between the UK and EU to work together on intelligence sharing after Brexit, but warned that there needs to be political will on both sides.
People across Europe are safer because of this cooperation and the unique arrangements we've developed between the UK and EU institutions in recent years. So it is in all our interests to find ways to protect the capabilities which underpin this cooperation when the UK becomes a European country outside the EU, but in a new partnership with it. To make this happen will require real political will on both sides. I recognise there is no existing security agreement between the EU and a third country that captures the full depth and breadth of our existing relationship. But there is precedent for comprehensive strategic relationships between the EU and third countries in other fields, such as trade. And there is no legal or operational reason why such an agreement could not be reached in the area of internal security. However, if the priority in the negotiations becomes avoiding any kind of new cooperation with a country outside the EU, then this political doctrine and ideology will have damaging real-world consequences for the security of all our people in the UK and the EU. Let's be clear about what would happen if the means of this cooperation were abolished. Extradition under the European arrest warrant would cease. Extradition outside the European arrest warrant can cost 4 times as much and take 3 times as long. It would mean an end to the significant exchange of data and engagement through Europol. And it would mean the UK would no longer be able to secure evidence from European partners quickly through the European Investigation Order, with strict deadlines for gathering evidence requested, instead relying on slower, more cumbersome systems. This would damage us both and would put all our citizens at greater risk.
OK, let's head to Munich. We can talk to Lord Campbell, former Lib Dem leader, now the defence spokesman in the House of Lords. Good to see you this morning. And in terms of what the Prime Minister said, I mean, she was effectively saying, let's come up with a treaty to maintain the status quo, wasn't she?
Yes, but as the chairman pointed out, everything she said in the first 20 minutes of her speech justified the fact that being in the European Union was the best way of achieving these objectives. And it's interesting, because listening again to the clip that you've just played, the Prime Minister really lecturing the audience. And this is an audience, of course, as you know, it's the most high-powered conference about defence and security in the world. It's the security equivalent of Davos. There was an opportunity today for the Prime Minister to set out precisely what she wants. You know, the government produced a paper, a document last September. There was nothing said today that wasn't foreshadowed in that document. And then she went on to say it's urgent. Well, the sooner she tells Mr. Barnier exactly what she wants, the sooner we may be able to get on with this and other things.
But she's got concerns, hasn't she? I mean, effectively arguing that the sort of rigidity that there is at the moment in terms of the negotiations and the competition that is currently there between the EU and the UK is likely to stifle this. She's saying, look, this is in your benefit, you need to work with us.
Well, that's true. No one could challenge that. But we're talking about ideology. It's ideology that's taking the United Kingdom out of the EU. And if it is genuinely a negotiation, then what is the Prime Minister willing to give in return? She was asked a question about that, about her red lines, and she indicated pretty clearly that she wasn't going to depart from them at all. You can't go into a negotiation and say, give me what I want, and I won't give you anything in return.
But she's effectively saying, isn't she, that in terms of giving her what she wants, it's actually giving the EU what they want at the same time. They need Britain's input in all of this.
Well, they have that already, they would say. And there are issues, more technical perhaps, which are important. On the European arrest warrant, on access to the information that Interpol holds, that is all regulated at the moment by the European Court of Justice. If the Prime Minister was willing to make a concession in relation to these two matters, then she might break that logjam, but there was no indication of that this morning.
But wasn't there a concession in the sense of saying if this treaty went through, when the UK and the EU were working together, the UK partnering the EU, they would follow the European Court of Justice, they would follow the ECJ guidelines?
Yes, just in that one respect, but not in relation to application of the European arrest warrant. And as the Prime Minister said, that is enormously effective. There is a little side argument here, of course, and that is the Supreme Court in the Republic of Ireland has just refused to extradite someone to the United Kingdom because of anxieties about the fact that, so far at least, the government doesn't seem to be in any way enthusiastic about the Charter of Fundamental Rights. So you've got these technical difficulties, and that, I think, was an opportunity today spurned for demonstrating, as the Prime Minister undoubtedly will have to, that she is willing to give some ground. The problem for her is she knows if she gives any ground on issues of this kind, then the ardent Brexiteers, both inside her cabinet and outside, will immediately be up in arms. To decide is, in this case, to divide as well.
But in terms of that home audience, though, isn't there a sort of overriding message in terms of what she said, which is, effectively, we need to get past the difficulties of negotiation and everyone just needs to be more pragmatic?
Well, yes, but pragmatism's a two-sided coin, if I can put it that way. No sense of pragmatism on the point of the Prime Minister today, and I have to say a certain sense of lecturing to her audience, which I don't think went down very well. The truth is, as I think I've said already to you, there was nothing said today that wasn't contained in the document that was produced last September. If this argument, or this procedure, this process, perhaps a better way to put it, is to make any kind of progress, then there's got to be something concrete on the table that can be the subject of negotiation. And negotiation, as I've already said, is not a one-sided process.
But as far as we know, there could be. She said we are ready to go on this right now. She may not have laid out those details that you would want to hear, but she was pretty clear that they were ready to go on this.
Well, let's hope so, because they haven't been ready to go on it up till now. But listen, it's not the detail I want that's important. It's the detail that Mr. Barnier and the other countries in the European Union want. And there's no question about this. There's a kind of sclerosis now in these negotiations, with, as keeps being pointed out by Mr. Barnier in particular, with time running out. If this matter's urgent, and in that respect I do agree with her, then surely it's high time she put on the table precisely what she wants and then in the course of negotiation, what she's willing to give way on. If she doesn't do that, then it's her ideological position which will stand in the way of the kind of cooperation which everyone accepts is absolutely essential for the security of the citizens of Europe.
Min Campbell, appreciate your time as always. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.